Hi there again. This is Brother John Allen from the Hermitage in Johannesburg with my weekly reflection of the Gospel. And on the fourth Sunday of Easter, we celebrate what's known as Good Shepherd Sunday. Pope Francis has called on the world's priests to bring the healing power of God's grace to everyone in need and to stay close to the marginalized, to be shepherds living with the smell of the sheep. This image is being invoked by a call of the shepherd who is sleeping and working outside, trudging through the rocky Palestinian hills in search of a patch of grass with a bunch of stubborn sheep. The shepherd who has the smell of the sheep, dung and body odors. This is rather a long way off from the image of Jesus as the groomed, doughy-eyed good shepherd, cuddling a tiny helpless lamb, or carrying one over his shoulders, as comforting and nostalgic as this image may be for us. I have just such an image in a holy card from my prayer book given to me on my confirmation in 1961. I think most of us want to see Jesus as taming what is wild and unruly in our world, who with a crook of the staff can solve what is unsolvable and answer what is unanswerable in life, who can protect and defend against the thieves and the bandits of this world, who come only to steal, to kill, and to destroy. Pope Francis reminds us that we eventually must come face to face with the reality that the world is still wild and unruly, that there are still questions without answers, that there are still thieves and bandits in the world who are bent on destruction. Sometimes the entire global village has to come face to face with this reality as we gaze on the shattered limbs of Syrian children. Where is the good shepherd in the midst of all this? Where is the shepherd that will sanitize all that is wrong with the world, who will clean up all that is messy and misplaced in our lives? Where is the shepherd to lead to the walled-off reality of the sheepfold? The sheepfold was essentially a secure pen in the wilderness constructed of large stones. It kept the sheep safe and guarded by a gatekeeper while the shepherd was away. We may have assumed the shepherd was leading the flock to safety, but that's not really the case, is it? Instead, the shepherd arrives to the sheepfold and calls the sheep away from the safety of the walled-off pen, and they follow the shepherd, not to safety, but to the open wilderness, because that's where the shepherd always is. The shepherd isn't in the sheepfold. The shepherd is beyond its boundaries, beyond the walls, beyond the place of safety and comfort. The shepherd comes to drive out his sheep from the safety into pasture where there is abundant life. Beyond the sheep pen, there is most certainly green pastures and still waters, but there are also roaming predators, wolves and bandits. There's also a valley shadowed by death. It's not just our image of the shepherd we've sanitized and airbrushed. We've done it to our text as well. We sheepishly say that Jesus simply brings out all his own from the sheep pen. But the original is so much more interesting. The verb used here is actually the exact same verb Gospel writers use to describe the violent casting out of demons. The shepherd casts out his sheep from the safety of the pen. Suddenly these sheep who have heard the shepherd's voice are quite literally outcasts. In the Gospel of John's historical context, this makes sense. Written in the latter half of the 1st century, and after the destruction of the temple by Roman military forces, John's Gospel is set amidst an intense conflict within Judaism, which resulted in the expulsion of Jewish Christians from the synagogues. In other words, like the sheep in the story, early followers of Christ were cast out from the safety of the sheepfold. This text offered comfort to those outcast Jews who followed Christ by reminding them that Jesus was outside the sheepfold, and that all they had to do was to continue to follow his voice, to find good pasture, and to restore their souls. It was terrifying and painful to leave the safe sanctuary of the faith of their fathers and mothers. It must have hurt to have the doors of religious institutions shut in their faces because of their beliefs. It must also have been incredibly disorientating to feel like they no longer belonged to the religion that birthed their own faith. The Good Shepherd is good not because he fixes everything, but because he lays down his life for everyone, for those who fit in, and even for those who don't, for those who stay in the sheep pen, and for those who are outcast. Who are those other sheep that do not belong to this fold? Perhaps, too, we may answer with a litany of outsiders: lesbians, transgender and gay people, foreigners, people experiencing poverty, those suffering from mental illness. The list is much, much longer. Jesus, the Good Shepherd, breaks bread with the outcasts and those society considers sinners. Jesus held these outsiders up as examples of profound faith. Jesus chose the despised to befriend. Jesus, the Good Shepherd, says that whenever we see the hungry, the poor, the lonely, the disenfranchised, those outcasts, we are seeing Jesus himself. When we hear the voices of those outcasts in our society, those disenfranchised and marginalized, do we hear that voice for what it is, the voice of Jesus the Good Shepherd, calling us out from the safety of the sheepfold to be a flock of the outcasts? Not all of us can sell all our possessions and give them to the poor as Jesus asked. Not all of us can hold our possessions and money in common so that none among us may be in need. That's how Acts says the early church functioned. Spending more time among the outcasts and marginalized to serve those in need or to lend a helping hand doesn't make us good people or even better Christians. The point of being cast out of the safety of the sheep pen is not to do what is right or to help others out. The point is simply to be where the shepherd is, and the shepherd is not in the sheep pen. As Lilla Watson, an Aboriginal woman in Australia, explained to well-intentioned folk coming to help the outcast there, "If you come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then come, let us work together." That is the point, that in some way this boundary-crossing shepherd is calling us to the idea that our liberation, our salvation, is tied up with the salvation and the liberation of all people. That is why the shepherd comes to the sheep pen and calls us out into the wild pasture, because that is where salvation and abundant life is waiting. May the Lord grant you peace.